You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is brought to you by the publishers of Renew Economy, Australia's best informed, most read website focusing on the green energy transition, and is supported by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Hello and welcome to Switched On Australia, the podcast about the people, ideas and technologies shaping our clean energy future. I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for joining me. Earlier this month, two very different visions for the future of farming played out on opposite sides of the country. In Broome, at the Australians Bush Summit, billionaire mining magnate Gina Rinehart warned of a net zero siege, painting wind and solar as a scourge on rural communities and describing their spread as having a heartbreaking impact on farmers. But in Canberra, at the inaugural Farming Forever Summit, producers from across Australia told a very different story. They spoke of wind turbines and solar panels delivering steady, drought-proof income, the ability to reinvest in farm infrastructure, and the ability to keep grazing and cropping alongside clean energy generation, as well as the benefits of going fully electric. For these farmers, the existential threat isn't renewables, it's climate change. Charlie Prell knows this firsthand. He's a fourth-generation sheep and cattle farmer from Crookwell in New South Wales. Years of drought and low commodity prices left his farm on the brink of collapse, until wind turbines turned things around. They secured his future, supported sustainable farming, and allowed him to retire with dignity. I sat down with Charlie recently to hear his story and began by asking when he first noticed the signs of climate change on his property.
I first started to notice things were sort of awry with the climate. Probably the real awakening for me was the millennium drought, the first 7 or 8 years of this century. Then the unbelievable vagaries of the climate. We had really wet seasons, really dry seasons, and then a very intense drought from 2015 to 2019. So through that whole period, I was awake to the climate crisis. It was probably the millennium drought that actually opened my eyes to something going wrong with the climate, something unusual in the climate.
And did the farmers in your area share the concern about something going awry, as you put it?
Oh, to be honest, I think most farmers at that point, the 1990s was a real commodity drought. So the commodity prices through most of the 1990s were really, really low. Interest rates were starting to shift up then. In fact, they peaked probably through the middle of that millennium drought in the low 20% rate that most farmers were paying on overdraft. So there was a lot of pressure on farmers already when the millennium drought started. When the millennium drought, which lasted 8 or 9 years, depending on where you were, when the millennium drought started to really bite, most farmers were just flat out trying to survive, let alone worry about and prognosticate about the cause of the millennium drought, whether it was climate change or not.
Things got pretty desperate for you, didn't they? You even tried to sell your land at one stage.
We didn't try and sell all of it, but we tried to sell land to pay down debt. In 2005, 6, 7, right in the middle of the millennium drought. And it sounds hard to believe now, but we couldn't sell our land. Nobody wanted to buy it, which is sort of unbelievable now when you think of the prices that farmers are getting for their land, that are selling, that are getting their land for their land now. We were trying to sell land to pay down debts to remain viable or some sort of viable on the farm.
And so what changed for you at that point that made you viable?
We were approached right in the middle of that millennium drought, actually, by a wind farm company to offering to host turbines on our land. I didn't know anything about wind turbines at that point, and I didn't know anything much about climate change, didn't know anything about renewable energy. Solar panels were only just starting to appear. Wind turbines were The first wind turbines were built in the late 1990s, just next to our property. So we sort of knew that there was an opportunity potentially for wind turbines on our land.
Mm.
I investigated it, and the numbers then were compelling for wind turbines. They were subsidised, not heavily, but they were subsidised in those days to try and facilitate the transition to, or the expansion of the renewable energy industry. And the numbers were compelling, really compelling. They meant that we could exist without having to worry about every year going to the bank to refund our loans, to maybe extend our loans. We knew that we weren't going to be allowed to do that by the bank. We were on the verge of bankruptcy, frankly, in those days, 26, 7, 8.
Mm.
And it was a really tough time. And that there was mental health impacts on both me and my wife as well, which not many people spoke about. As you know, it's a sort of a taboo subject. It's not a lot more spoken about now than it was then. But
Yes.
people just didn't talk about mental health.
So what did the wind turbines represent for you at that time?
The opportunity to secure our future, basically, but to secure our base and then build a sustainable future, but not just financially, but to be able to farm ecologically and environmentally a lot more sustainably than we've been able to in the past. And I know there's an old saying, you can't be green without the green, which means if you haven't got the finances, you can't actually run a sustainable, environmentally sustainable farm. And that's true. That's dead true. So we were stuck in that hole that a lot of people probably still are stuck in now. The commodity prices cycle has changed a bit, but the weather cycle, the only change in the weather cycle is that the weather's become more disparate because of the reality of climate change. And that's really why I started to be concerned about climate change and the widespread impact of climate change on our country. I used to live near Crookwell in the southern tablelands of New South Wales, and that area is widely regarded as some of the safest country in New South Wales. It's right on the top of the Great Dividing Range, heavy volcanic soil, reliable rainfall, good water supplies, and not a hot summer.
Yeah.
So lots of things that we took for granted in that area were suddenly changing. We were running short of water. We were going into these intense droughts. There was another really intense drought from 2015 to 2019 after I'd become awake to the threat of climate change. And then obviously the bushfires of 2019, which came at the end of that really intense dry period, 2015 to 2018. When it's back to your question, there was an opportunity for us to create not a legacy, but a sustainable farm that would be sustainable for generations, for decades and generations, because of the passive income stream from the wind turbines. We pursued that doggedly. We signed contracts with the wind farm company in 2004, and it took to 2018 before those wind turbines were built.
Yeah. Were they paying you in that interim period between 2004 and 2018?
One of the things I spoke about at the Farming for Forever Summit was get a good lawyer. If you get approached by a wind farm company or a solar company, get a good lawyer who understands contract law, preferably with some experience with renewables contracts. And we had a good lawyer in those days. So we had a contract that obliged the company that we were in partnership with to start paying us. There were set critical dates that they had to meet, like gateways, I guess.
Yeah.
And if they didn't meet those gateways, they either had to start paying us or they could walk away from the contract. But also, really importantly, we could walk away from the contract as well.
Yes.
So that legal advice is a really, really important aspect of the increasing pressure on farmers as the renewables roll out, accelerate.
How did your relationship with your bank change when you actually signed with the wind turbine company?
Instead of being racked with nerves and having an accountants poring over our books and trying to work out and doing budgets for 6 or 12 months or even longer periods than that. We were assured by our bank that we didn't actually need to renew our loan arrangements. We arranged a pay down schedule once the payment started, and we started to reduce our loan. And the bank, not in writing, but the bank assured us that our loan arrangements were secure. We didn't have to sweat through the renewal of our loan arrangements each year.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure that was relieved because of that on me, on my father, and my wife was unbelievable. It was like an elephant being lifted off your shoulders that you didn't realise it was there until it was gone.
Definitely. And when farms, are struggling for the ready cash, it's often the infrastructure on the farm that fails, doesn't it? You can't afford the fences or repair the roads, etc. This gave you a steady income to be able to do all of that, didn't it?
Oh, more than that. It gave us the capacity to employ people, and it gave us the capacity to fix fences, which, it's like repairing the jeans and then repairing the repair of the jeans, and fences that should have been pulled down and replaced 10 or 15 or 20 years ago were being patched up. So instead of that, we had a program of gradually replacing every fence on our farm, which we hadn't quite concluded when I retired and we sold the farm a couple of years ago. But when we did sell the farm, the real estate agent that we used was just blown away by the quality of the infrastructure, the fences, the roads, the buildings, laneways on the farm. It was unusual for them. For them, it was unusual to see infrastructure in such good condition, and that was absolutely totally due to the passive income stream we were getting from the wind turbines.
So you didn't have any trouble selling?
No, we sold at the right time in the market, but we had really intense interest in our property. The numbers are public and they're probably still on the web, but a property of 2,000 acres, we were getting about $220,000 a year from the income from the wind turbines. And that was, as I said, we started getting paid in 2010. The turbines weren't built till 2018. So in that intervening period, we had an enormous sustainability and enormous capacity to improve the whole structure and the environmental capacity and reality of the farm that we were running.
So not only did the wind farms allow you to create a sustainable farm, to give you a good income, to improve the value of your farm, it also allowed you to retire, didn't it?
Yeah, I've always had a plan to retire from farming. I'm not retired, but I'm retired from farming because I'm 68 now and I've been retired for 2 years, so 66 I retired. And I want to do things that I want to do rather than things that I have to do and for the next 10 or 15 years. That is a really big issue for farmers and the structure of farming, that most farmers don't have the opportunity to retire with dignity.
Mm.
And that's a really important thing for me, for my wife, but also for my children.
I was wondering what your neighbours and the other farmers in the area thought about you putting the turbines on your property. Did you get any pushback from the local community?
We did get a lot of pushback because it was really early days for wind turbines. There was only one small wind farm next to us, which was actually the first grid-connected wind farm in New South Wales. The turbines that we were proposing to build were 160 metres to the top of the blade, not about 50, I think, or 60 metres to the top of the blade on the small wind farm next to us. So there was a lot of anxiety and fear of the spectre of the turbines. Well, I think there was a pretty well orchestrated campaign against turbines generally at that point, but also against our turbines particularly. Not necessarily neighbours. There were some neighbours who were very supportive of it. There were other neighbours who were very opposed to it and still are.
Right.
I understand that, and I spoke to all of my neighbours. We had genuine, honest conversations about the reality of the turbines. I've always tried to look at things from other people's perspective, and I understand their fear and their anxiety about the spectre of these turbines ruining their future, devaluing their land, killing all the birds, all that stuff that you hear about wind turbines, which none of it's true, but the fear is real, and the fear is true, and the fear is palpable for those people. There's a really, really simple way to change that whole argument or discussion or debate, and that is to include neighbours, particularly close neighbours to wind turbines and solar panels for that matter, in the payment schedule for the turbines or solar panels that are erected. And it's not compensation, it's remuneration. It's including them in the benefits that these renewables, that infrastructure is generating.
I mean, it's not just farmers, though, is it? It's entire regional communities that can potentially benefit from the energy transition. And things have changed in recent years. I will look at some of your earlier experiences, but things have changed in recent years. So now there are community benefit sharing obligations in a lot of states where these companies operate. Do you think those obligations are sufficient?
The community benefit sharing initiative was actually started in the area that I used to live in around Crookwell. It was imposed on the wind farm that was built a little bit before ours, about 10 kilometres west of where we used to live. And the community benefit obligation for the renewables developers was imposed by the New South Wales government on every wind farm that was built after, probably about 2007 or 8 or something like that. They started. So that part of the business structure of the benefit sharing is long lasting. It's generous, I think. Now, the Upper Lachlan Shire is about, there's about $800,000 every year that comes into that shire as community benefits from wind farms. $800,000 every year, and for probably 25 or 30 years, that number is indexed, so it'll increase with inflation.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary to me. A shire of, I think, about 1,700 ratepayers or something like that. It might be more than that. That's an extraordinary base contribution to the shire, but not to the shire council, to the residents and the little sporting clubs and all the little voluntary associations within the shire. And that's fantastic. The thing that was missing, though, and it's been corrected a little bit recently, the really important part of this that was missing was there was no obligation, no structure for a dedicated benefit sharing proposal that gave the neighbours to the wind farms and the solar farms an opportunity to participate in sharing in the wealth that these entities were generating. Renewables are extraordinarily profitable. Superannuation companies and investors are really, really, really flocking to owning renewables developments. And why wouldn't you? If it's something that's generating electricity, it's not a captured market, but it's a market for the future, and they're going to be there for at least 30, potentially 60 years. That sounds like a pretty good investment to me from a superannuation perspective or a long-term investment perspective.
Can I just go back a little bit to some of the early days of, when the renewable energy industry was coming into your area? Because I just want to sort of work out how much of that behaviour, and perhaps still some of the behaviour of the industry, is impacting on some of the attitudes that we are now seeing, and what sort of repair jobs have to be done. Because, I mean, as you said, your turbines were installed in 2018. Tell me what your experiences of some of the developers were in the early years, and also what you witnessed about that behaviour as well in the area.
Yeah, okay. It took us at least 18 months, maybe longer. Us means me and my cousin who were working together as neighbours to develop this wind or get this wind farm up. This is in 2001, 2, 3, 4. And it took us 18 months to get a contract that we were happy with through negotiation with lawyers, lots of legal fees, which the developers ended up paying because we said we're not going to sign a contract unless you pay them, as in reimbursing our legal costs, which is fair enough. I was despaired then and still do now at some of the corporate malfeasance, really, practices of some of the early stage renewables developers, not all of them, but probably most of them, but at least some of them, that were taking farmers for a ride. And I reckon taking advantage of people that they knew that they could take advantage of, and not treating them as equal partners, which is what we are. It is a landholder lessee agreement, but without the land, the wind farm companies and the solar developers have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So it's an equal partnership. They need to get permission. The big difference between mining and renewables is that the renewables developers cannot do anything without permission of the landholders, because the renewables are built on the land. We're not talking about the mining which happens underneath the topsoil, where the landholders don't have any power. And I think there's been a continuing impact even now from the early stage developers of those days. People were scarred by their experiences, both landholders and hosts like me and neighbours. They were scarred by the treatment that they received from some of these renewables developers.
Can you give me some examples of how these companies behaved?
I know, I'll quote you my personal experience. My cousin and I were separately told that we weren't allowed to talk to each other about the contract that we were signing.
Yeah.
Now, that's sort of ridiculous in a way, because it's like, am I not going to talk to my cousin about it ever?
Yeah. These are these non-disclosure contracts which
Yeah.
a lot of companies get people to sign.
Yeah. And I understand, commercial and confidentiality, but to not talk about that stuff when with potentially joint partners, which is what we were then, that's just really bad behaviour. And not only is it, I don't think it's ethical. It's more than that. It's just stupid. It's surely the developer would have a vested interest in making us partners, rather than treating us as lessees, which is what they were trying to do.
So if they regarded farmers as business partners, how do you think that would really change things? How would you like to see it change things?
Well, I've been an advocate of benefit sharing for a long time, and I've been an advocate for equity sharing for nearly as long, as in having some sort of ownership. One share would be enough in the equity of the project that's being built on my land. The main reason for that is not, apart from the sharing in the wealth that the project's generating, because we're sharing in the wealth by the lease agreement that we signed. But the main benefit is to have a seat at the table when the developer and then the wind farm company that owns the wind farm into the future are discussing any financial plans for the future, including, really importantly, the decommissioning plan for the infrastructure that's on the land. Then that might be 30 years from now, but it's still something that needs to be starting to be considered now. So there's a plan, and having a plan is fine, but a plan is only as good as the capacity of the company to implement that plan. And if it means decommissioning a wind farm, that's an expensive proposal, but it's not as expensive as people think, because the wind turbine pretty much is 80 or 90% recyclable. A lot of wind turbines in Europe, because Europe are way in front of Australia in this renewables rollout, a lot of wind turbines in Europe are getting to the end of their lifetime, and they're actually recommissioning them. They're not decommissioning them, they're recommissioning. So they're modernising the infrastructure on the top of the towers, or rebuilding the towers, whatever needs to be done to recommission the turbines to run them for a further 30 or 40 or 50 years.
So what you're saying is that by becoming seen more as business partners, that's a business arrangement over 30, 40 years that they have to regard the farmers.
Yeah.
As opposed to just an access point.
Yeah. I mean, there's extraordinary amount of benefit for the renewables developers and the wind farm companies. There's as much benefit for them as there is for the hosts and the neighbours. And I'm not just talking about the hosts in this thing. There should be the neighbours involved as well if they want to be. And the benefit for the renewables companies is that they actually can share the farming systems and operations can be shared and built into their operational plans for the wind farm or the solar farm. The best example of that just recently is the whole move to agrivoltaics, where the solar panels are lifted up off the ground and they have sheep and cattle and even cropping actually underneath the solar panels. You can build a totally integrated structure that includes and probably enhances, and it actually does enhance agriculture, and have the renewables infrastructure over the top of that. And so my vision for that farm that I sold was to create an environmentally and ecologically sustainable farm. But it's bigger than that, because if you can have a farm that grows food and or fibre and then generates electricity at the same time, that's a pretty attractive proposition for anybody into the future. And the community, the way that infrastructure sits, should have the opportunity to at least explore that option. At the moment, they don't, and I'm not going to stop campaigning for that just because I've retired from being a farmer.
As you say, there's lots of opportunities here for farmers, and you mentioned that if the advice that you would give other farmers if they're approached by a renewable energy developer is get a good lawyer. What other advice would you give farmers if they are approached?
Don't take anything for granted. If somebody says something to you, make them write it down and make sure that it's in the contract that you're signing. As I said, a contract is, in our case, it's a 30-year contract with an option. So potentially the lifespan of that contract is 60 years. There's no way anybody can predict what that land will be like or what the issues will be in 10 or 15 years, let alone 60 years. So there needs to be a mechanism in the contract to allow you to bring issues that arise to the table to be discussed.
Yeah.
In an equitable partnership, that's possible. In an inequitable partnership, it's difficult. Go and visit another wind farm or solar farm before you even sign a contract to see what the reality is like. We went to Victoria and South Australia to look at wind farms that were much more common down there than they were in our area before we signed our contract, just to have a look at the reality of what it meant to be sitting under turbines. We had a tour of a wind farm near Ararat in Victoria. So go and have a look around. There's a lot more wind farms around now, and solar farms for that matter. So go and have a look at the wind turbines, talk to the people that live underneath them and next to them, and talk to the local council or the local Chamber of Commerce or all of the above. Get some idea about what mistakes they made, what they would do better or what they would do differently. Go into a negotiation with your eyes wide open rather than expecting everything's going to be hunky-dory, because it's a legal contract. These developers are generally large multinationals or agents for large multinationals. They don't do anything that's going to impair in their business unless they have to. And it's up to you as the other party to the negotiation to insist that they do it. And we've had lots and lots of benefit on our farm from the wind farm itself, not just from the income. We've got really, really good roads through the farm that we're entitled to use. In the event of a bushfire or a flood, but our country wouldn't flood, but in the event of a bushfire, to have a road that is pretty much, well, it is. It's as good as a really good quality gravel council road, to be able to shift a fire truck from one end of the property to the other in 10 minutes instead of 3/4 of an hour, that's a pretty, that's a big advantage when you're battling a raging bushfire. Little things like that. So
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things people need to understand. And I know getting good legal advice is the most important of those, but sharing experiences. And I know there's an initiative happening at the moment actually to form an association of renewables hosts and neighbours to do exactly that, to share experiences, to come together and talk about what happens next, and what are we going to do about decommissioning, or how are we going to combat some of the fear campaigns that are still unbelievably still out there about renewables.
I mean, it's a form of collective bargaining, isn't it? And I was intrigued to hear at the summit how you gave a little history lesson about collective bargaining. Just tell me that story.
Collective bargaining as in unions, and that's a scary word for farmers because of the shearing strikes and things like that. But unions were formed in England by groups of farm workers who were sick of having their labour taken for granted. So they initiated the whole concept of collectively bargaining. So if one person stops work, that's not going to make any impact on the business. But if all of the people that work on that in that business stop work together, called a strike, then that has an impact on the business, and you have to the employer has to sit down with the employees and negotiate their position. That whole concept of a union started with agricultural workers. I guess that's the point I'm making. And that has coalesced into the unions that we see today all across society. But also cooperatives started mostly as farm produce corporations, cooperatives collectively bargaining against supermarkets, for instance, and things like that. And I don't like using the word union because it scares people, but farming people. But if we go back to completing the circle and forming this cooperative of landholders and neighbours and in a wider context, supporters of renewables, I think there'd be really, really great benefit to everybody, society generally, over that if that concept was initiated. And I know it is being initiated right now in Western Victoria, and hopefully it'll expand as it is seen to be successful.
There was a lot of discussion both on stage and in the corridors last week at the Farming Forever Summit about how the voices of pro-renewable farmers who want to take climate action, are taking climate action, get drowned out by anti-renewable voices. What do you think needs to be done to change that? Clearly a collective voice would be useful.
Yeah, two things I'd say to that. Firstly, it's a real shame, but climate change and acting on climate change has become totally politicised in this country. And that's really unfortunate. It's really sad because the reality of climate change is not dictated by politics. It's actually scientists that are telling us what's going to happen. To disconnect renewables from climate change is a really important part of speaking to regional communities about renewables, because there's a lot of opposition to the reality of climate change in regional communities, supported by political parties for their benefit, not for anybody else's benefit except theirs. So if we can subvert that by saying, well, actually the renewables rollout is nothing to do with climate change, and it's not anymore. It is sort of in a way, but the renewables rollout is happening now and being driven because of and by economics. Renewables, even with storage, even with transmission lines, even with the whole renewable package, is cheaper, way cheaper now than fossil fuels. And it will be forever, because fossil fuels are gradually being depleted and they're becoming more and more expensive and harder to access. Oil particularly, but gas as well, and gas depletes really quickly, and coal as well. There's no economic modelling that even suggests that fossil fuels are going to get cheaper anytime soon. Every economic modelling that's been done on renewables, they've predicted that renewables will get cheaper. And every economic modelling that's been done about renewables has been wrong because they've always underestimated the rate of reduction in cost of renewables. So renewables are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper logarithmically, not just, it's not a straight line, it's a logarithmic equation.
Just on the issue of anti-renewable sentiment amongst farmers, do you think that the National Party is really representing the majority of farmers' interests in the energy transition?
My personal opinion is, and I want to be really apolitical about this, but my political view of the National Party is that they're sort of conflicted between their numerical membership base is farmers, with lots and lots of farmers who are members of the National Party. Their economic base is underpinned by the mining industry, because if you think about it, that's logical, because all of the mines are in regional Australia. There's not too many mines left in the cities. They used to be in the cities, but they're not anymore. So the National Party is sort of conflicted about, are they going to support their numerical base, or are they going to support their financial base, or are they going to have a mix of both those? And there's a raging debate within the National Party right now about the reality of climate change. They're going to have to resolve that, and there's really good people within the National Party who are trying to see some sense, from my perspective, see some sense in addressing, acknowledging at least, and then maybe addressing the reality of climate change. The threat to farming communities, regional communities from climate change is by far the biggest threat, not just environmentally, but economically as well, to regional communities.
Because it flummoxes me that the National Party keep on going in the way that they're going, and they didn't lose any seats in the last election. But it's, they're supposed to be representing farmers, and it's farmers who are right there on the coalface, so to speak, of climate change. They're seeing what's happened. Their livelihoods are being affected. And it does make you think that, farmers need better representation than that.
They do, and as you know, there's a increasing support for independence, not just in the cities, but in regions as well.
Mm.
And I think that's the numbers are compelling. 30% of the population now don't vote for either of the major parties, which include the coalition as one party, the Nationals and the Liberals, because they are in a couple of the states anyway. If 30% of the population vote independent or minor party, that's enough to swing an election one way or another, and that's been demonstrated already over and over again, probably since Julia Gillard's minority government in 2010. So that's over 10 years now, and that is also a change that is linear. It's not a flash in the pan change. It's structural. People are sick of party hacks and misinformation and vested interests capturing and controlling those parties, and the biggest one of those is the fossil fuel industry. People are sort of waking up to all of that stuff, and it's because it's a big ship. It takes a while to turn it around, to change it, but it's happening, and it's happening. It's unstoppable. I think it's unstoppable. The change towards a more independent, collegiate political system is really important. The National Party need to be aware of that, and I know there's, as I said, there's really good people in the National Party who are very aware of that into the future, but there's going to be a debate about it, because the incumbents, whatever they are and whatever they're doing, whatever industry they're in, the incumbents always have a consolidation on power, but they also don't want to give that power up. So there has to be a bit of a tussle, and there already is, about changing the system. If they don't change the system and go with and move with the change that is happening and become more accountable to the electorate for their actions, the major parties I'm talking about, then they will become irrelevant. There's no other future for them.
Charlie, final question. If you had a platform where you could talk to every farmer in Australia about the energy transition, what would you say?
I would say to them, this change that's happening in the energy system is it's not a transition, it's a transformation. We're actually rebuilding the energy system from a fossil fuel-based system to a renewable system, which doesn't use inputs apart from the sun. And the sun and the wind is actually created by the sun. If we want to embrace that future, and it's huge change, and sometimes change is scary, but it's inevitable. We want to embrace that system and embrace that change and maximise the benefits for regional Australia generally, but specifically for small regional communities. Then we have to work out how we can maximise the opportunities that this change is creating. Because with change, there's always fear and disruption, but also with change, there's always opportunities. And the people that make the most of those opportunities are the early adopters of change.
Charlie Prell, thank you so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
That's my pleasure, Anne. It's really nice to talk to you.
And Charlie Prell is a fourth-generation farmer from Crookwell, now retired and living on the New South Wales south coast. He's also the former chair of Farmers for Climate Action. That's it for this episode of Switched On Australia. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, share and comment. It all helps spread the word about electrification and decarbonisation. I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time.